you find the information helpful. We're going to talk today about onboarding new employees and creating a culture of cybersecurity. So something I really believe in, which is that essentially that once we're giving people the keys to the car, so to speak, that we need to make sure that they're ready to drive on the road. So let's get into it. So just a brief intro, when we bring someone on our team and they give them access to our technology, we're just really giving them an incredible amount of trust. Even if we do all those things that we might do during the hiring process, so have them sign off on stuff, do their background check, so on and so forth. Now we're giving them access to client lists and such. So client lists, private information on data subjects. Now they're a part of your compliance program. If that new employee decides that they're going to give your client list to a third party, or they're going to have a security breach that you're liable for, that's on you, even if it's something that they do intentionally. There's also the idea of trade secrets. Every business that I deal with, I know has things that they'd rather not have out there, and so we want to make sure that we're protecting it. Strategic information, of course, the way we operate is really important. We don't want to give people free reign to share that information. There's also damaging information. Maybe we had a project that didn't go so well, and we're fixing it and we're doing the right thing, but we don't want everybody in the world to know about our bad project. And then their rights themselves. I mean, maybe this is the most important thing, which is that even if, most people, I'm talking about a lot of insider risks here, people doing the wrong things, stealing information, but most of the time, the individual is kind of a tool for a bigger crime. The hacker who's infecting you with ransomware doesn't really care necessarily about the information subject. They don't really care about the person behind the computer. What they care about is how much money they can make by exploiting this individual. So, and that's usually just trying to take advantage of the rights they have to your information. So when we're onboarding new people, we want to set them up for success in multiple dimensions, including managing cyber risks. I think there's a lot of focus when people come on board to get them productive, make sure they're able to work, make sure that they're able to, get started. We have all these clients that need help. We have to take these calls. We have to do all this stuff. But really, we haven't necessarily always prepared them to deal with the digital risks that are out there. So for today's agenda, we're going to keep it pretty simple. We're going to talk about threats stemming from employees. So here are the things that sort of are at risk stemming from any individual who works for you. We're going to talk about intentional versus unintentional insider threats. So technically, everything that comes from the actions of an end user could be considered an insider threat. But there's obviously a big difference between somebody who does something maliciously versus somebody who gets caught doing, just clicking the wrong thing or sending someone the wrong information. There's obviously a big difference. Well, the policies that new staff need to acknowledge before they have access. So really, it's not just about teaching people, it's about getting their acknowledgement that these things matter. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, excuse me. Specific cybersecurity topics you need to review with new staff. So, we can't create a team of security engineers. That's not the goal. What we want is a staff who knows the basics, knows what to look out for, how to protect themselves, what actions to take, so on and so forth. The long-term issues of managing user privileges and rights. What does it mean, to give someone rights to stuff, and how does it impact, and how far should we go with this stuff? Also, we're going to talk about how remote and hybrid work has impacted onboarding and security. So I imagine, if you're, and it's April of 2022 right now, you've probably brought on new staff of some kind in the last 2 years. And I imagine at some point, for most of you, they were working remotely. Maybe they're working out of their home, or maybe some of your staff were, or you found a new employee. I think at one point we hired a couple people who didn't even work in the state. They never stepped foot in our office. That obviously has impacted security and how we onboard people. So I think it's worth discussing. And then, of course, Q&A. So I have a lot of ideas about these things, but I don't know for myself what you have in mind, what challenges you've had with employee onboarding. So I'm going to open it up and let you guys talk about it. So let's get into the employee-based threats. So there's a few things. So we have the idea of intentional harm. So an employee decides, maybe because they don't like working for you, or you did something that upset them, or they're just a bad person, that they're going to intentionally harm you. Maybe they're going to, you know, not care at all about the things they click on, you know, just be passive about their approach to security awareness because it doesn't matter to them. Or maybe they're going to copy things onto USB drive because for the next job, they're going to take your client list and start marketing to those people. The truth is that we have to be mindful that people can do this. I mean, once you give someone the keys to do something, they can do whatever they want. If I decide to drive my car into a brick wall, there's nothing really stopping me to do that, except the fact that the state of Maryland and my insurance companies and things like that would really discourage it, and there would be legal enforcement. But if I want to do it, I can do it. There's also the idea of bad personal authentication management. So this is a huge problem where people are using the same passwords over and over again. Things are not complicated enough. There is a lack of use of multi-factor authentication, or perhaps they're ignoring the setup of multi-factor authentication in the first place. I know sometimes when we're doing projects or things and we're trying to deploy multi-factor for, say, 50 people, usually have a few people who are resisting and they don't want to have it happen. Well, I mean, the reality is that when people are resistant to deploying these kinds of authentication technologies, it's an employee-based threat. We need people to come in line and do these things. There's the idea of too many rights. You know, when you give somebody access to all files and all things, and they can install whatever they want on their PC, and they can go to any website and do whatever they want with no restrictions whatsoever, you're basically creating maximum risk. Yeah, this employees can be very enabled to do whatever they want for the business, but they're probably also going to be enabled to create a cybersecurity incident because somebody had access to too many files. You know, and there's a meaningful difference between if somebody was able to breach 10 files or 1,000 files. So if we are able to, you know, create, we're going to talk more about this later, but if we're able to create the rights-based environment for staff, that would limit our exposure in the event of a cybersecurity incident that is not intentional. There's, of course, the clicking on bad links. So, you know, if you go to the wrong website or you get a phishing email that you don't identify as legitimate and you click on that bad link, I mean, at the end of the day, those kinds of threats, while they're targeting, you know, vulnerabilities on the system or trying to exploit something, they're really targeting the end user because they're counting on you as the individual to click on something and actually start the attack. We really do need to educate people on this stuff. There's also social engineering. So you have a presence online, and information on you could be used against you. You know, some of the people who are in this chat, I bet if I did research on you, I looked at your LinkedIn profile and your Facebook profile and maybe did a little Google searching, I could come up with a pretty decent idea of who you are as an individual. And then I could use that information to try and trick you into something else. Maybe convince you that I work for law enforcement, or that I'm some kind of inspector for the county or something like that. And I did this just by pulling public information on you. Well, people need to be aware that just because someone calls them up or sends them an email trying to create trust with them based on using information they know about you, it's not necessarily legitimate. People also need to be aware of what they can do to limit their personal information online. You know, every place we put our information out there, the more information we give, the more we put a target on our backs when it comes to social engineering. There's also eavesdropping physically and digitally. So one of the big conversations right now with security stuff is people working from home and creating VPN tunnels, getting into offices, or people working out of an airport or in a Starbucks and things like that. If somebody in a Starbucks is looking over your shoulder and reading what's on your screen, there's not a lot of security tools to stop that aside from a privacy screen. If in that same Starbucks that you're logging into, you think you're connecting to a secure access point, but instead you're connecting to a pineapple, if you will, a third-party Wi-Fi access point designed to intercept your information, now they're basically digitally eavesdropping on all of your stuff. People need to be aware that the access points they connect to, so on and so forth, can create real risks. There's also shadow IT and personal device management. So this is particularly an issue for people who are working remotely right now, but a lot of times, I guess it's both the beauty of technology and also a potential threat, We can do, there's a lot of easy systems that we can use to do a lot of our productivity things. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that we decide, an employee decides that they're going to use Dropbox instead of the SharePoint file sharing solution that you're using, or whatever. You have a product that you use, and instead the employee decides they're going to use something else because they like it better. They're going to use their personal Gmail account. Maybe that's a better example. This is something the person controls, and we have to discourage that stuff. If someone decides to go in their own personal email account at their home and share information that they know about the company, that's something that is only controlled through good personnel management, not necessarily through technology. There's also the idea of personal device management as well, which is the idea of people working from home and connecting to work assets, but not really securing their own devices. We need to have some kind of control over the devices that have access to our company assets and our company data. There's a big difference between someone who means well but has an incident versus one who acts with malice or negligence, and that's why we're going to talk a little bit about intentional versus unintentional threats from people. So when you look at the intentional side, it's the stuff like using the unapproved technology that I brought up before, or sharing data with unauthorized partying, or knowingly visiting dangerous websites. These are things we really have to cramp down on and not allow people to do. It needs to be clear in our policies. And when we onboard people, we should get acknowledgement that these things are not acceptable and that they will be met with consequences. It's a violation of the rules, just like it would be not showing up to work late all the time, or being unavailable, or stealing company resources. None of these things are acceptable, and we can't create an environment where it's seen as acceptable. The other side is the unintentional stuff, which is like the clicking on phishing or falling for scam or some kind of uncontrollable incident. And I think one thing that's really important is to distinguish this stuff when talking to your staff, right? We want people to be on our side. We want people to care about this stuff. And the thing is, if people make an unintentional mistake and then we crack down on them as individuals for those unintentional security mistakes and make them feel bad or penalize them in some ways, then the problem is that if something else happens, they're not going to report it to us. They're not going to want to enter our security culture, if you will. We want these people to learn and grow and be a part of the solution, and be forward thinking about these things. Now, the people who put the operation at risk, who don't care about stuff, who've been given the message and then still act negligent anyway, or people who consistently ignore the security message, maybe they pretend that they're ignorant, but instead they're just not putting in the effort. We can't treat them the same way. These people need to know that this stuff matters, and it's not a casual thing to be secure on your computer. It's something that matters for the life of the organization. I hope that makes sense. Policies before access. So it's really important. I know this is something that maybe is not the most popular. It's really important that when we let somebody into our computers, when we let somebody into our file servers or our databases or our applications, CRMs, ERPs, whatever it is, we're really giving them a lot of power. And so before we do that, they have to agree to a bunch of things. We wouldn't do this sort of stuff with, I use cars as an example. We wouldn't give somebody the keys to a car without seeing that they have a driver's license. But a lot of times when we're bringing staff on to do work, that's kind of the mode. I know, especially now when so many organizations are looking for talent, they want to hit the ground running. But here are a few policies that we can get them started with, at least set them up for technology success. So the first is acceptable use. Acceptable use is a very easy policy to define. It just says these are the things you're allowed to do with your work computer, with the files that you have access to, so on and so forth. And then also here are things you're explicitly not allowed to do. We don't have to be, draconic when it comes to things people aren't allowed to do. It should be a lot of fairly straightforward stuff. You're not allowed to visit adult websites at work. You're not allowed to visit gambling sites at work. You shouldn't be downloading illegal software or really software of any kind. You are allowed to share proprietary information with these people, but not those people. This is the way we do share information with these third parties, and we do it in no other way in case somebody sends you a phishing email saying to send all the social security numbers of staff to some email address. We don't do that here. It's just the rules of engagement, and it's all common sense stuff. One thing I'll mention before I continue too is that templates for these policies are available all over the web, including from the SANS Institute, S-A-N-S Institute. Really good if you're trying to get started with policy, because they give you the sort of the bones of what you need, and then you can just fill in the logical stuff. Anyway, moving on, there's also data privacy and sensitive data. So these policies can all be called different things depending on your nomenclature, but the idea is that every organization should define what data is important to them. So what files matter and why do they matter? Why are these sensitive? Why are these files stored in different places, and where should they belong, and how should they be shared? There has to be some kind of classification to distinguish between data that maybe not so meaningful and data that is extremely sensitive and could be risky if it was lost, stolen, breached, etc. The example I use is an email that I send to Jill asking where she wants to go to lunch today is not really important data. The email to Jill asking her about our marketing campaign for the next few months is a little bit more important and sensitive, and we need to treat that a little bit differently. Me asking Jill for her payroll information is even more important, and that deserves a whole other level of privacy. We have to create these sensitivity rules within our organization, but as you can tell, it's all kind of logical. What are the things that are the most risky for us, and define it in policy? Incident reporting. People need to know that if something happens, whether it is intentional or unintentional, that there is a process to report incidents, whether it's reporting it to the service desk at DP Solutions or their boss or managers or probably more than one person, but it needs to be clear that when something happens, people know who to report to. Sort of going along some of the lines with acceptable use, there's also the idea of review of processes and improved systems. Everybody should understand before they work the process in which they work. I think a lot of times this is the thing that's a little less difficult to implement for most organizations. They know what they want people doing. I think the important part is understanding the aspect that shadow IT is not acceptable. These are the things we do, this is the way we do it, and that you're not allowed to use this third-party Dropbox or your personal Gmail account or some tablet that you brought in without running it by our IT department first. So, you know, always give staff an opportunity to ask questions or make suggestions. You know, policies should be a collaborative process, I think, you know, and really anything with security, when people feel like they know why they exist and they have a reason to have a stake in it, people usually will go along with this stuff. I brought up the issue with people being resistant to implementing multi-factor authentication. The thing that usually gets people around on multi-factor authentication is when I'll lay it down to them and say, basically, if you don't do this, there's a almost certain chance that your account will be breached at some point because someone's going to crack your password. And we have to do this because these are the risks and this is what could happen if that occurs. Usually that gets people there and they're willing to get the text message on their phone or open the app on their phone to do the multi-factor authentication. But instead of just going at and saying you have to do this, it's more of saying, yeah, you have to do this, but here's why. I hope that makes sense. I think people really should be a part of the process, and I think one of the reasons we fail on security sometimes is because people aren't really a part of it. They don't feel connected to the security or the policies. Here's a few cybersecurity topics specifically for trainings, and we want to focus on the big picture threats. So here are the threats we absolutely positively need to talk about with new employees. And the number one thing, of course, is phishing. So this is probably not coming as a surprise to anybody. I wish I had something revelatory to say, something that would shock everybody, but phishing is still the number one way attacks start, whether it is fraud, like people volunteering information or account compromise, to ransomware incidents where an actual malware is launched from a phishing email. I think Verizon said something like 80+% of attacks still originate from phishing. I wouldn't be surprised if the number was even higher. The reality is that most systems, when they're properly secured and maintained, aren't vulnerable to most brute force threats that most individuals are going to see. So we really need to teach people about the phishing side, where people get these fake emails or now phishing phone calls, text messages, etc., that try to get them to click things. What defines an incident and what to do during one? So we have to talk about, well, here are some things that could happen in our organization. You could get infected with malware, ransomware, and here's who you report it to. Here's some other incidents we may have. We may have a fire in the building. We may have a flood. Our systems may go down. Here's what you're supposed to do in light of that. You may have to go around our IT systems because the building was on fire, and here's how you report to your manager about that, or something like that. People just need to know what to do when bad stuff happens. Maintenance tasks that occur. We shouldn't expect people to be a part of maintenance. Fortunately, technology doesn't require individuals to do that much when an IT department is maintaining stuff. But we need to make sure that our people aren't getting in the way of maintenance, which is to say, people should understand that we're patching the machines, that we have some kind of monitoring tools on them, that there's something to protect us from ransomware, that we have spam filters in place, all this other stuff. And they should know that if they get a message from DP Solutions that says, hey, I have to update something, or that the machine says it's rebooting or something like that to apply an update, that they should allow these processes to happen, that they shouldn't be stopping the regularly scheduled malware scan that was scheduled, or whatever it is. All those tasks that occur, we want them to be a party and a part of the solution, not getting in the way of it. And usually it's more about illustrating what we're doing and why it matters. And similarly, and I sort of alluded to this before, what security tools are actually being used. People have a right to know what tools are in place, especially if it's stuff like monitoring where they go to websites. People should be aware of that stuff, and it can be transparent, and people should understand why it exists. I think that's totally fair. User privileges and rights. So this is less about the individual and more about how you manage them. So it's really management's job to determine how much access is needed for staff without taking risks. If the staff member has been given too many rights and then they have some kind of unintentional mistake as a result of having too many rights, that's kind of on management. That's not really on the individual. Like another way of looking at it is, if you have a policy that doesn't specify not to install software, and then you give someone full admin rights to their machine, and then they install software that causes a problem, well, I mean, who is that on? I mean, you haven't really illustrated the problem. Admin rights in general should be extremely limited. So most individuals do not need local admin rights on their machines. Most people, especially in a work environment, just need to be able to log in and do their work and have access to their specific files. I think there may be a question, but I'm not totally sure. If so, we'll get to questions at the end. Most people don't need rights to install software or stop maintenance procedures. So, if someone says, I really need to install this thing, it can work through our IT department, or it can work through the approved processes. They don't need to do it right this minute. Most people don't need the ability to stop a scan from running or stop a patch from running. That's not really a good excuse for anything. Or I don't want to reset my password now because I can't remember it, or something like that. These sorts of things are not legitimate excuses. Files should be categorized and access should be limited to need. So getting back to the sort of sensitive data stuff before, we need to be able to say, here are the different buckets of data, and they sit in different buckets because they matter in different ways, and they're organized in such a way where it makes sense. Then those individuals who have rights to access the most sensitive stuff can have those rights set up accordingly, as opposed to making it a free-for-all. The free-for-all thing is so bad for monitoring, for forensics, for all these various challenges, that we need to have some kind of logic behind it. And it's management's job to define that. Even us as an IT company, DP Solutions, we're not going to know what data necessarily matters to you. You're going to have to define that for us. This is our business, this is what we do, and this is why these pieces of data matter, so that we can sort of create an organization around it. Rights should be controlled from a central location. So you should be able to revoke rights on the fly if necessary, including mobile access. So fortunately, most technology these days is focused on centralization, things like Active Directory, et cetera, mobile device management, so on and so forth, where we can go in and say, hey, we are terminating this employee, or we are changing this person's rights. We're just going to do it, and they're going to be impacted on their device directly. Impact of remote work. So again, I think a lot of the stuff I'm talking about today has been complicated by remote work. So it's more like, I don't necessarily have direct solutions to these problems. It's more like you have to consider a bunch of new variables and see how they impact you. So communication really matters now that people are working in different places. And so people who may work, for example, I kind of have a hybrid situation myself. So I come into the office a few days a week and I work from home a couple days a week. And people need to know that I can be reached via Teams and email and my cell phone. And there's no real issue whether I'm here or at my home where I can't figure out how to reach people on my staff no matter where they are. So I would suggest, first of all, that people really understand when they come on board what the various communication channels are, what's approved, of course, and what is expected of them when it comes to communication, how fast they need to be available on Teams, as an example, or at their cell phone. Staff needs a clear understanding of the role of personal devices with company data, including new devices. So this is really critical. When people are working from home, there seems to be this assumption that the security issue really needs to be on the hosting side, right? Like that everything is on the server that we have in our office or the cloud server, and I'm just remoting in from this machine, and so it doesn't really matter what my device is. But that's a short-sighted and incorrect look. I mean, we need to take inventory of the personal devices people are using to remote into things. If we need to make sure that those devices are patched, especially if they directly touch data. We can't allow someone's remote machine to be the victim of a ransomware attack where then our data is held hostage because of something off-site and something we don't manage or control. It's not a big deal. Personal devices can be used in a work environment in a secure way. It just has to be managed properly. And so things shouldn't just be added without that kind of scrutiny. You have to educate staff on the risks of things like public Wi-Fi, eavesdropping, and keeping sensitive data away from people around them. So I've sort of gotten into this already, but everything that has to do with less about the technology itself and more about where and how they use the technology needs to be discussed, especially like the public Wi-Fi stuff and eavesdropping. You'd be surprised how many attacks start from non-technical breaches. Of course, remote staff need to understand that shadow IT needs to be avoided. So if it's not on our approved list, it should not be used, right? I shouldn't use WeTransfer. Whoops, I don't know why that happened. For some reason, sometimes the full screen mode ends on the, oh, but it did it again. For some reason, full screen mode sometimes disappears during a GoToMeeting. I'm not sure why. Remote staff need to understand that shadow IT needs to be avoided. I mean, the reality is that we have systems that we created and we secure and we can monitor and check in the event of an incident. And if people go around that, it's a direct violation of policy. There may be reasons why they have a better product in mind. Maybe somebody says, you know, I know we use Office 365 for this stuff, but I really want to use X product for this thing. Well, you can make the case for that, and maybe that can be integrated into our technology stack. But it can't just be done first and then reacted to second, similarly to the new devices conversation. So wrapping up before our Q&A, you know, you want employees to be empowered, and that starts with onboarding. So we want them to do their jobs, but we want them also to care about security. And it's very exciting to get people started and productive, but if we allow them in without actually doing our due diligence and actually making sure that they are aware of our security posture, it's really setting up, it's kind of a ticking time bomb. It's setting us up for a disaster. People who aren't doing the right things with security, who don't follow the rules, it's kind of inevitable that something bad is going to happen. And you know, working in managed IT services for as much time as I've been, I can sort of tell you that when incidents occur, it's usually pretty predictable, and it usually doesn't occur to the organizations that are super diligent. It's not to say that they don't happen to those organizations, but there's a direct correlation between the people who make sure their employees come in right, they do all the right things maintenance-wise, they train people, et cetera, and the ones who sort of bury their head in the sand or push these sorts of things off. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, while we're getting the Q&A stuff together, and feel free to drop anything you want in terms of questions in the chat, we are going to do a webinar on the 25th of May. And for this one, we're going to talk about creating a secure and effective home technology environment. So I was thinking a lot about some of this stuff, the hybrid work and security and things like that. And one of the things we kind of have clients who ask us about is, you know, how do I make sure that when I am working remotely, that this stuff is secure, that that my home environment is proper, that I have the right Wi-Fi set up, that I'm using the right internet connection. Not just that, but we have this now, breadth of technology in our home. It used to be that, maybe we did a little email and some Netflix and stuff, but now with IoT, you have things like smart devices, we have things like smart security systems, et cetera. And we have to figure out ways to make that work, make our security system, our Netflix, our smart fridge, our work from home people, and our kids who are doing education remotely and all this other stuff. We have to make it all work together. I mean, this is kind of a complicated thing now. So I'm going to kind of discuss it, give you some tips, and hopefully make your home environment a little bit better for work and play. Anyway, that's it. Jill, what questions do we have?
Yep, thanks, Ben. Okay, so let's see. Our first question is, what's an appropriate response when an employee intentionally violates a policy?
That's a good question. So it's all going to be a matter of degree. So what's the intentional violation, right? Did they go to look at, do you not allow any kind of personal browsing at lunch, and they went and looked at the scores of the baseball game yesterday? Look, I'm not your boss. I'm not going to tell you how to discipline your employees, but I don't think we need to bring out the fifth degree and hold people to the coals over stuff like that. But if somebody goes and they decide they're going to take files off-site on a USB drive and intentional violation of company policy, it should at minimum be a write-up and possibly a termination event. I mean, you could go anywhere along the spectrum from short, minor conversation and clarification of what is expected of them, all the way to termination. And I think it's going to be a matter of what degree the employee's actions puts your business at risk. And not just that, I mean, consider the fact that if you don't properly discipline these employees when something bad happens, then other people may come after you. So, there's if I'm going to use HIPAA as an example. So you're a medical office and you're trying to protect all this patient health information, and someone goes and intentionally does something insecure with a patient health record. Maybe they photocopy it and give it to somebody they're not supposed to after they were told not to. I don't know what the issue is. They do that intentionally. Or maybe a better example would be is they copy a bunch of files and they bring it home to work on their home PC that we don't manage. I think that's a really bad one. You gotta go down hard on them, because these sorts of things could result in fines to our business. And so just a little chit chat about stuff like that isn't going to cut it. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, great, thank you. Is it safe to let new employees use their own laptops and cell phones to work?
Potentially. So the way I would typically do something like this is oh, okay, you want to use your personal device? First, does it jive with what the company does? If they say, yeah, my personal device is a Linux box that I use in my home or something like that to connect to your Windows environment, the answer might be no. The answer might be that doesn't work with what we do. But assuming they're using one of the generally commercially available stuff, an Apple iPhone, an iPad, Android tablets, Windows devices, whatever. Most environments should be able to support this stuff, but the key is we have to take inventory of it. There has to be some kind of security standard for these devices. So endpoint detection, maybe multi-factor authentication into the remote asset that they're connecting to, encryption in transit, possibly a VPN, so on and so forth. We have to basically create the security layer so that device can be used securely. But as I intimated earlier in the presentation, it can't just be joint, and it can't just be yes. It's got to be yes, but. So you want to come on board? Great. Tell us the devices, bring them in. Let's write some information down. Let's take an inventory, and then we're going to come up with a process to integrate those home devices.
Okay, kind of a follow-up question to that. At what point does it make sense to have a company cellular versus personal?
It's sort of a budget thing. The good thing about a company-owned device, and specifically with a cell phone, is that really when it's company-owned, is the employee has no say in what you do with it. So in the way before time, in more than 10 years ago, I used to have this thing called a BlackBerry. So I had a BlackBerry and an iPhone. So I had a personal iPhone and I had a company BlackBerry. That was just the model we had, and I guess in 2008 or whatever it was. And but the reality was, on the BlackBerry, it was strictly a business device. So I was doing business calls exclusively with it. I really wasn't doing any browsing at all work emails, etc. And the iPhone was completely different. Now there's some huge benefits to this. I don't have to worry about wiping any privacy concerns or having mobile device management on a personal device or anything like that. But it's inevitably more money. It means it's the device that I have to put the money out for as a business owner to invest in cell phones, which can be quite expensive, and cellular plans, which also can be quite expensive, especially if you need unlimited data and stuff like that. So, I mean, most of the time, if you're using what I would call mobile device management, something where we can put security controls on a personal device without having to make the investment in all this other stuff, that's probably the way to go, and allow people to use their personal cell phones to connect to networks. The specific solution for you may vary. I think it's more of a here's a problem that our business has, and let's do an analysis to come up with a solution kind of thing. 9 times out of 10, depending on the environment, you'll probably want to rely on the personal smartphones and then integrate the security into it.
Yeah, I was going to say there's some solutions like even Microsoft Intune that kind of allows you to segment the data on your cell phone between personal and work data. So there are solutions.
Yeah, totally. There are solutions to do it. The important thing is that it's considered, right? That there is a conversation and a strategy that's employed, and then a management and maintenance procedure that supports all that stuff. And if you're doing that, then these things can be done. The worst thing is when, and this goes for any kind of technology thing, it's when you act first and ask questions second. You should always ask the questions first and then act.
Great, awesome. Well, hopefully that answered the question. Okay, we do have another question. Do I need to have a formal cybersecurity training for new employees every time we bring someone new on board?
I think something basic is good. I mean, what I always tell people is, like, you're not going to teach people everything about cybersecurity. I mean, that's totally unrealistic. But you can tell people the basics. You can tell people what phishing is. You can have them sign off on basic policies. For my clients that I have on our security awareness platform, I've been doing new employee training. So, and we do this here at DP Solutions, where we have somebody new who comes on board, and I have a campaign ready to go where I send them a bunch of stuff that they have to do right away. And it's sort of an automated process. That makes it a little bit easier. But at the very least, a little bit of basic education about what they could face and what they should do about it has to happen. Where you go from there is a matter of debate. I would say that there has to be the good thing about having a security awareness training program in place for all staff, not just new staff, is that it kind of osmosis, or I don't know how you say that word, but like you sort of create security culture by osmosis, if that makes sense. So like, if everybody in the office is consistently trained about phishing and security awareness and good cyber hygiene and stuff like that, and then somebody new comes in and gets some very basic stuff to start, then they'll integrate into the organization quite nicely. And then over time, they'll get more solid on the security awareness stuff. But if it's a complete void vacuum and nobody really talks to them about anything, then it's really just, again, it's that ticking time bomb. Something's going to happen because someone's going to do something unintentionally that's going to lead to an incident.
Okay, great. I don't have any more questions in, but we did get a few questions about getting a copy of the PowerPoint. So I would be happy to send like a PDF of the PowerPoint to anyone that wants it. Like I said, again, we'll have the recording available on our website, and we'll email it out to everybody. I'd also like to point out that our blog, dpsolutions.com/blog, we've got some really good resources that just give you some general cybersecurity best practices that you can send to your staff if you want to print that out or whatever, or send that out. That would be great. And then I would also recommend signing up for our security tips. So these are just a few of the questions that came in from some new clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of you, I think, attend our webinars all the time, but we try and put out a lot of educational information in a variety of ways: the security tips, the blogs, the videos, everything. And some of it's better. One thing Jill and I talk about a lot is some things are better suited for different mediums, right? So sometimes I'll write something in a blog because it's really suited, it's a quick thing or a video. But something like this, as you can see, is a little more abstract, better suited for a webinar. So yeah, we offer a lot of stuff. Well, thanks everybody for attending. We really appreciate it. If there's any follow-up questions, maybe you were you didn't want me to talk about it on air or something like that, you can send me an email, bschmerl@DP Solutions. There's all our contact information. And we really look forward to seeing you all next month at our next webinar. So take care, everybody.